Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, guys.
Okay, so first of all, just as a random aside, I've been worried to death, and I have to thank Dan and the guys in the back that I keep looking down and making sure that nobody has the same bottle of water, and I've been paranoid to open one.
Thank
so
you.
I may
Thank
sip
you.
on water. I just want to take care of my guests.
My aside is I wore boring socks. So.
All right, so let me start. Before I get to the border, I actually want to start with Never Back Down. How do you go from the prior administration to running now this massive operation? And I know, because you and I have talked about it, that one thing you wanted to do, because you're passionate about it, is a ground game operation.
Yeah.
But it's not coordinated with a candidate because it's a super
Right.
PAC. I mean, why go through the burden of that?
Well, because we can start early, for starters. And I'm, before I was AG, I was a state senator in Northern Virginia. For those of you who know, as a conservative, I was covered by the Endangered Species Act. But door knocking, personal contact, there is no substitute for personal contact. You will not, we talk about changing hearts and minds all the time. Mailers don't change hearts and minds. Video texts don't change hearts and minds. A person talking to a person. That's how you change hearts and minds. And I believe that. I was out in July in Iowa, and we have our ground training center there for everybody in the country. And I spent 2 days with that class, and I came away so pumped. These are people who want to be doing this. They're fired up about Ron DeSantis and his record. A lot of Floridians, not surprisingly. The other thing I had somebody say to me in Iowa on that trip, it was a lady, I was just sitting at the lunch table like y'all are sitting at these tables. She said, there's only 2 states in America where people sit around at dinner and talk about how great their governor is. Florida and Iowa. And now maybe all in Georgia will dispute that, but I'll tell you, it was interesting to hear that from just somebody who lives there. And I got fired up being there with the door knockers. And because I really believe it, I've knocked tens of thousands of doors. Virginia, we have odd year elections, for good or ill, so it never stops. And I door knocked for 20 straight years, about every year, no gaps.
And let me interrupt you there, because you and I have talked about this, because when you were running for Attorney General, I remember one time I called you and you were out knocking on people's doors. And you're smart about it. I mean, you're obviously not going to knock on the most radical progressive who has all the Stacey Abrams signs in her yard in Virginia, but at the same time,
except when you're feeling a little spicy.
Yeah, true. But Republicans talk about door knocking in their ground game. You defied expectations in the state legislature in Virginia and as Attorney General because you really did put your boots on the ground. And
for me, it began in the first state Senate race. I wasn't supposed to win the nomination. I wasn't supposed to win the race. And both of my opponents met their vote goals and lost the race. And Kelly and I were talking on as we were passing by there, and I was thanking her for the voter registration. That doesn't happen with the usual folks. One, you have to motivate people to come out, and that's part of a candidate's job. You got to give them a reason to come. And 2, you got to put in the work to go find them and bring them out. And we did that. And half of my volunteers, I had the volunteer base in a state Senate race that you would normally see in a congressional, because I was an across-the-board conservative, unapologetic on all of it. They attacked me on all of it, and me and my campaign manager would high-five each other. Woohoo, another in-kind mailing. They told everybody what we believe. And, attacked us for being against a tax increase. Can you believe that? And we literally joked about it being an in-kind contribution from our opponent. But if you make the human connection with the middle people, and this is just a lesson, and this isn't conservative or liberal, this is human. I have yet to find a human being I don't agree with on something.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And my job as a candidate, if I want to represent you, and you got all those Stacey Abrams signs in your front yard, is to find what we agree on. And if it's important enough to you, you'll vote for me over that. And there were lots of issues where I defy the stereotype I was the mental health leader in Virginia for years. Did that work for 12 years myself, not legislative, like in the world. And property rights. The little guys get squashed. And I've always been a little guy's guy. My mentor in the Virginia General Assembly was a Democrat. Can you imagine that happening today? Not likely. Johnny Joanno, may rest in peace. And he was a little guy's guy. And we agreed on that stuff. And we fought the powers that be. We fought the utilities, and we fought the Verizons of the world. And they're trying to take, whether it's rural, y'all were making that distinction, whether if you drive up I-95 and go through Richmond, slow down a little bit and look around you. You're going through the middle of the city. People lived there before 95 went through. Why do you think it went there? Because the middle-class black communities didn't have the political power in Virginia when I-95 was built to stop it. It squashes the little guy. That's why property rights are important. That's why the Bill of Rights is important. Someday I hope we get property rights back in the Bill of Rights. Overturn Kelo. But you started out asking me, look, I was in the Trump administration, how'd I end up doing this DeSantis thing? And it's largely because I was in the Trump administration. I like President Trump. I enjoyed working for him. What you see is what you get. Very rough and tumble. I won't war story you to death. There are lots of good ones, but and some real heartbreakers. And the heartbreakers are, of course, why I'm with DeSantis. There were just too many of them. And you look at DeSantis, he is a machine. The guy is a machine. He's relentless. He didn't get into Yale because he was legacy. He came out of a Florida public school. They didn't give him a baseball scholarship. They don't give baseball scholarships. He worked 6 jobs to get through Yale. I'm doubting too many of his classmates were working their way through Yale. He went on to Harvard Law. He was the only guy to go to the military out of that class. Not Wall Street, no big bucks. After 9/11, he looked for a path in, and that was his path to serve his country. He was a federal prosecutor. And he's just worked and worked and worked and earned it and earned it and earned it. And y'all, you're in Georgia, so you're close. You might see some of what goes on down there a little more than other parts of the country.
We hear about Florida Man all the time.
Yeah, I'll bet. I love the Florida-Georgia football game. Y'all are doing all right on that one. But, whew! I have an SEC daughter, went to Auburn, so I got to pay attention to this stuff now. Yeah, whatever. Sore winners. That's not good. That's not good, folks.
There aren't a lot of people from Alabama in the room.
So. He prepares. You look at those press conferences. No one, I'll put it in fun terms, has touched Ron DeSantis's trolling of the mainstream media for 5 years. Donald Trump calls him names. He fights with them. I appreciate that he fights with them. Not so much keen on the names, but he fought, and he still fights with them. Ron DeSantis took it to a whole new level because he prepares. And now I'm going to come back to being a conservative. We need to move the needle. We need to convince people of what we believe. And you don't convince anybody of what you believe by calling them names, even the mainstream media. And I do enjoy seeing the blood on the floor, I will admit. But Ron DeSantis does it by telling them why their question is wrong. He corrects their question on the fly in a press conference when he didn't know what that question was going to be. He doesn't get the questions beforehand like Joe Biden. And then he doesn't answer their question. They get punished. And he moves on to the next one. And of course, the most famous of all, the book banning. Blah, blah, blah. If you were in here earlier, you heard him describe that. Their version of book banning is you taking porn away from a 3rd grader. So he held a press conference. Oh, you guys are complaining about me book banning? Let's talk about it in a press conference. You ask all the questions you want. So he lines it all up. They got the TV cameras running. And he starts holding up the books. And all these TV, oh my God, they're cutting their video feed. Said, yes, thank you. Mic drop. I'm out of here. They made his case. They wouldn't show it to adults, but they want your kids to have it shoved down their throat. And when he stands in front of, you've probably, some of you seen video of him going toe to toe with some of these folks. Boy, you see the passion, man. And he's inspired Moms for Liberty, Army of Moms. That comes from his work protecting your children and grandchildren. That's where that started. All over America it started with Ron DeSantis. But when I see him doing it, we all hear about the mama bears because we're all afraid of the mama bears, especially the papa bears.
Yes.
But I mean, I see the papa bear coming out, man. I see it, and I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it.
We thank Never Back Down for sponsoring the conference, and I will move on before it becomes too much of a DeSantis rally for
I bring my blood pressure back down. Let's all talk about something real happy, like the border.
Let's talk about the border. The real reason I wanted you here. I find it right, and you and I were talking in the green room earlier, that the Biden administration would love to put a check mark on the last month or so where they say border crossings are down. Curiously, it comes at the same time the governor of Texas has put like a big divider in the river so they can't cross, and the Biden administration would like to have credit for this. Can you just explain, before we actually get to the here and now, when you were in the administration and in charge of making sure the border was secure, what was different then that is now where all these people are trying to come across where they were?
So the most important thing, and DeSantis actually said it with the maritime influx they're facing, he got right to the heart of it. And so I'll go right to the heart of it and then go to Texas. If they know they won't get in, they won't come. Right now, they know they will get in. No matter what they say in the White House podium, it's not a tick, they're winking at them. And I've been beating on my friend, Greg Abbott, he probably doesn't think he's my friend anymore, for almost 2 years. Border states, and this would apply to Florida under some circumstances, can repel an invasion with nobody's permission. Pull out your Constitution, very last paragraph of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. You know it as the Compacts Clause. It lists all the things states can't do without congressional permission. One of them, not surprisingly, is wage war, except when actually invaded. Except when actually invaded. And Texas is being invaded. Arizona, New Mexico, we couldn't get Doug Ducey to do it. It took until May of this year, with the takedown of Title 42, for Greg Abbott to finally start actually keeping people out of the country. He's not going as far as I'd like to see him bring in the DPS boats and start shuttling people back across and ignore the Border Patrol. Just ignore them. And they're all going to be like, yeah, go guys. Sorry, boss. Their morale is so low. Suicides are going up. I talked to some folks inside the department recently, and that's a real rising concern. You've all probably read about the morale. But Operation Lone Star, it's always these cool, tough names, right? It's never Operation, go ahead and walk right on by me. But that's what they were doing. It was all Greg Abbott photo ops. That's all it was. They wasted a whole lot of money until May. The buoys are one example, but they also put up wire, and most important are the men and women standing behind that wire. A wall is worthless without the men and women behind it to stop you when you bring the ladder to the wall or dig under the wall. And they've got to have both the political backing and the ability to return you out of the country. And Texas is doing that, and so you saw this drop. Oh, wow, they're serious. Now, the cartels control the border from the southern side. They control the flow. They'll shift the flow, and they'll make adjustments. That's who's making the adjustments, folks. It is the cartels. It's not, Joe illegal immigrant decides where he's going to walk into the United States. He is told where he's walking into the United States. And it is a business that may make them more money now than drugs. And they have military level hardware and intel inside our country. Not the hardware, but the intel. Some of it's very simple to pull off for them, way too simple. And we were never, including in the Trump administration, we were never allowed to be aggressive enough. That's why you hear DeSantis, and I'll move to other candidates as well, saying, I'm going to put the military on the border. It's going to take years to build a wall that'll matter. What's the military for? It's for defending this country. This is an invasion. This is a national security issue. This is not, 60,000 cops guarding the border. This is a national security issue for us. And we're suffering mightily, and we are going to for years because of who's coming through that border. The ones we catch are the easy ones. The ones we don't are the scary ones.
In that regard, I mean, we've seen on a couple of occasions now people from China, from the Middle East, who have gotten caught. And I've just got to think, when we have 50,000 gotaways a month, we don't know who the gotaways are. And if we're catching these people, how many are proportionally a part of those who are now somewhere in this country that we don't know?
Yeah, what was your question to all of them? The unknown unknowns?
Yeah, the unknown unknowns.
We know the number of unknowns, but we don't know who they are.
Right.
And actually, we don't know the number because the gotaway number you hear are identified but not apprehended. We don't know what we don't identify. We know the cartels are operating tunnels. We know that they operate waterborne entry, airborne. Those are pretty rare, but high-value efforts on their part get high-value attention. Chinese immigrants are paying a whole lot more money. And one thing Governor DeSantis didn't mention is off that Florida coast, the Bahamas are 48 miles from the United States. A speedboat, and I mean, think Miami Vice here, folks. I'm not kidding you. And a speedboat making that run hits it so fast that unless we have a helo or one of our speedboats right there, he mentioned the Coast Guard, but really it's CBP doing this, then they're coming in. And those are $30,000 a trip Chinese illegals, heavily. Wow. That's a lot of what that traffic is. Not high numbers, but we don't know who they are. China exploits every single aspect of our system, legal and illegal. And, we looked really tough in the Trump administration, and we were. I don't want to detract from what we accomplished. We left a lot on the table. And we can secure this border, folks. It can be done with the will and a willingness to make the Department of Defense do what you want them to do, and the Department of the Treasury do what you want them to do, and the HHS, which actually has a role in immigration because of the kids, even though it shouldn't. We can thank the Bush administration for that. Do what you want to do. And that didn't happen in the Trump administration.
Our friend Chip Roy, who keeps coming up from everyone, has mentioned, I told the story with Brian Kipp earlier, that just a few months ago he was at the border, and it was an American who was not of Hispanic native. He was Caucasian American being paid by the drug cartels to ship people into the country for human trafficking. They assume they're coming over to work in jobs, and yet they're being rerouted into sex trafficking. It boggles my mind that that's happening, and two, it boggles my mind it's actually an American citizen who's working for the drug cartels.
Evil doesn't know citizenship, right? And evil isn't going anywhere. And there's a God, and he's got an opponent, and it's at play here. These cartels are the most evil, vicious people in the Western Hemisphere. They kill children when their parents don't pay the toll. We don't see the photographs of what the cartels do on their side of the border. It's so vicious and awful. Our media just won't cover it. They won't print it. It's too horrific. And Mexico is a failed state in part. You had Kevin Roberts up here Heritage, TPPF, Center for Renewing America. We actually had a think tank, conservative think tank in Mexico join us. We put out not a position paper, but a declaration of reality, I'll call it, about the US-Mexico relationship. It's not an alliance. It's not a partnership. They're not an ally. They're not an enemy. They do not control a third of Mexico. By the way, that's been kind of true for all of Mexican history. They've had this problem for a long time. And now in that space are unofficial governments we call drug cartels. They fight for territory. A sixth of Mexico is actually controlled by drug cartels. Another sixth is fought over between the drug cartels and the Mexican government. And that can be cartel versus cartel. The Mexican government may not be a player. That's very difficult to deal with across 2,000 miles for us. I would note that international law requires nations not to allow their nation to be used as a launch point to harm neighbors. That is being violated. And we all wrote that. It's only about a page long. You could find it on any of our websites. To wake up our fellow Americans, our congressional folks, to look at this point by point and realize, Mexico is not what a lot of us sort of grew up thinking it was and hoping it would be when NAFTA rolled around. NAFTA's been, in my view, quite a failure. It was a real learning experience for me. It took me from being a free trader to a fair trader, and because of what it did to Southside Virginia. And Mexico is something that we are going to have to deal with long term. I hope we learned from our over-occupation of the Middle East that we don't want to take over responsibility for Mexico, but we have to protect our interests there in ways that no one has done. And again, that includes the president who's been toughest in this space up to now, and that is President Trump. But he wouldn't do this either.
So we do have more than one candidate now who is committed to bringing in the military, but I mean,
Tim Scott, you had here today. He's run one ad at least. He's not as specific about it as DeSantis is, but you are right. He's run an ad saying, "I'm going to bring the military down here to secure this border."
It seems like, when you've even got the Democratic mayors who had these supposed sanctuary cities that wanted to be sanctuary cities until they got the illegal immigrants, now they want them gone. This does seem to be a winning position for our side, and yet we've got the situation where Title 42 goes away, and the media declares, well, actually the situation's improving now, the number of people crossing are less, and is that because of Texas's efforts, or did something fundamentally change, or is it just a lie?
So Title 42, we use these numbers. The reason it's called Title 42, that's public health law. So this is the COVID order from March of 2020 related to the border that was put in place and said, because of this public health danger, you can just turn people away instead of going through immigration law, which is Title 8, which is so wrapped up in duct tape of due process, it's really tough to get people out of the country using Title 8. And so even the Biden administration, for a year and a half, they didn't trickle down. We were turning around over 90% of all illegal border crossers in under 2 hours at the end of my tenure at the Department of Homeland Security. That is an astonishing logistical accomplishment. And that took a team effort to do that. They, not surprisingly, didn't keep up that level of effort, but they also didn't just stop returning them. What a lot of people on our side, even as bad as the border is and has been, don't realize is they were returning large proportions of those border crossers under Title 42. So now what's happening is, okay, so we dropped 30,000, I'm using rough numbers, don't hold me to this, from May to June, but they're all staying now. Whereas maybe 40% at least before were getting pushed right back over the border. So our catch and release folks have skyrocketed. That's what's going on. And of course, they're lying about all of this stuff. Mayorkas, what? There's a border problem? What do you? I don't know what you're talking about. And just proceeds to lie about it.
So let me just, because I hear when I get callers on my show, they're building the next army of Democratic voters. That's what they're. I mean, philosophically or procedurally or politically, why do you think the Democrats are so bad on this issue?
First of all, Biden's been underwater with Democrat voters on this issue since the spring of 2021, literally within months of him being sworn in. Democrats, this is a pure radical left play in their party. That's who has the wheel in this administration. It's like AOC, but she's 80. And we look at this and see a disaster. This is exactly what they intend. This is the plan. This isn't a failed plan. This is the plan. And they believe someday they're somehow going to get amnesty for some chunk, and they'll all be so grateful to the Democrats, they'll vote Democrat. But what's the trend in America? I mean, Ron DeSantis won 60% of the Hispanic vote in Florida. That was 60, folks, in case you thought that was 16. 6-0. George Bush, back in the day, won, 42? Mm-hmm. And the woke craziness, look, these are cultural conservatives, they're religious folks. They're not about that. So I don't believe we shouldn't do amnesty because we won't get the votes. Honestly, I feel pretty good about competing for Hispanic votes, and we focus on Hispanics because they're the overwhelming majority of this flow. I'm against amnesty because it keeps everybody coming. Oh, good, they'll do it again. And I am just like you, I start as a principled, rule of law conservative, and you just can't write laws and then let people break them en masse, or you may have a country, but what's it worth? I mean, we're not a tribe or a clan. We're bound together by a set of core principles, and you can describe them all as the rule of law. And we have to control our own country, including who gets to become an American. And that's a proud moment for people. I've sworn those people in. Before I was the deputy secretary, I was running the legal immigration agency, USCIS. And if you won life's lottery and were born here as an American, God bless you, I was too, go to one of those ceremonies.
So
go. It'll move you.
We just a couple of minutes left. What would you advise an incoming Republican administration, day one, what procedure do they need to start thinking about?
Well, first of all, they've got to get all of their Border Patrol people back on the line, and literally, in the transition, I would be talking to the incoming Secretary of Defense. We're going to move 100,000 troops down to the border. Start planning the logistics. I mean, everything. These are going to be tent cities. It's going to be water buffaloes in the desert, like Iraq, and we're going to man the whole border. And that doesn't mean there's going to be one person every 3 feet. Parts of the border are border on impassable, but that just means you need less people to keep them impassable. And we're going to need a lot of people in RGV, Rio Grande Valley, down near the Gulf of Mexico. Sorry, I kick into my government acronyms here. And that determination will lower the flow. It was interesting when Donald Trump came into office, him coming in lowered the flow.
Imagine that.
Peace through strength. They believed him. And they kept testing it, and the numbers, of course, kept coming up. I was a little slow to really deploy what needed to be done to really stop the flows. But, and we never deported people. The Obama-Biden administration deported people at a faster rate than the Trump administration. And that's a problem. That is a big problem. And we can't let that happen anymore. And, there are solutions to that very quickly. It won't be day one, but by the first budget bill, we can get started on that. The first 9 months, you can see a major turnaround in the security at that border. And there are things you can start on day one, like those deployments that take a month or so to really be in place, but they'll have a very intense effect. And there are a lot of other things we can do that you should just trust we can do. And I'm not going to tell you because they'll be less effective. But if your government is determined to secure that border, and as much as we did in the Trump administration, we did not put the assets on that border to secure the border, or the other governmental assets around it to secure that border. And I'm glad to hear candidates talking about using the military. This doesn't mean a shooting war with Mexico, folks. It means being serious about defending our border. That's what it means. And it's also going to happen, by the way, on the northern border, which doesn't get talked about very much. It's actually a tougher border to police. But you look at Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, they've seen a 10 times spike in illegal crossings.
Got to keep the Canadians out.
I'm telling you what, man, except the truckers.
Yes.
We want the truckers.
Ken Cucinnelli, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming.
Hey, good to be with you.
So good. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just take this.
Yeah, okay. Excellent.
Thank you all.